course, it was all the dollars.
Okay, let's go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Finance Administration Committee. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. On the agenda, the first thing that we're going to do is talk about the presentation of the FY 2013 annual financial audit. We have Mr. Dave DeCleva here from Smith Sapp. I'll turn it over to you and let you go ahead and walk us through.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I would like to begin by stating that the authority remains in very good financial condition. We did issue an unqualified opinion on the financial statements, and that begins on page 1 of the presentation. An unqualified opinion is also known as a clean opinion. This means that the amounts and disclosures contained in the statements are fairly presented in all material respects. The authority's statement of net position is on page 7. If you'll turn to page 7, I'd like to point out a few highlights to you this morning. You'll see that total assets at year-end were $76,136,000. This is a 3% increase from the previous year. The largest increase was in cash and investments. They increased $1,825,000 during the year and totaled $37,599,000 at year-end. Of this amount, the board has designated $34,573,000 for specific purposes. I will point out the note that breaks the detail down for you when we get to the notes section. The authority's other asset balances are comparable to the previous year. Total liabilities were $28,979,000. This is a 28% increase from last year. This large increase is primarily due to an increase in closure and post-closure care costs. These costs increased first due to capacity that was utilized during the year. And secondly, the engineer changed the estimate of capacity and the estimated cost to close the C&D landfill. The estimated capacity decreased by 21% from the previous year, and the estimated cost to close increased by $2,282,000. And I think Donna has some additional input on the changes there.
We thought it might be good to talk about this just a little bit and make sure that everybody understood what happened here, because it's a substantial amount. We've got some maps here. Just to acclimate everybody with where we are, if you look at the map, you see Highway 90 in the upper left-hand corner. The first little yellow dot there is our administrative building, okay, on this map. Okay. Then as you come up the road to the right, the first closed area there is the West Hill. That's the old C&D, the East Hill, sorry. And then further on the left is the MSW area, the closed area, and then the current area that we're in. The yellow part there, the first part of it, you see the Y area, which we're in the process of closing right now. And the rest of the yellow is the West Hill, which is our C&D hill. And that's the area that David is talking about, right there. If you turn to the second page, it's a blow-up of the yellow area in it, in itself. Okay. If you look at it, yeah, in this form, you'll see that the whole green area coming around to the dotted pink line, that equates to the yellow area on the first map. Okay, that's our C&D hill. And what I want to explain to you is I want to tell you a little bit about the procedure of the closure and post-closure so that you can understand what happened with this adjustment. We are required to get a third-party estimate when we move into a cell and start putting trash into that cell on closure and post-closure. And we got that from our engineer, and we've talked about that a number of times. They go in and they do an estimate based on our approved closure plan and then all of the current cost and their experience is built into it to come up with this closure estimate. And then each year, it's reviewed and increased for inflation, decreased for any money that or any cost that we may have incurred already. Well, what happens is when we move into that cell, we are then required by GASB to recognize in that year what portion of those closure expenses we've incurred in that year, basically the airspace that we've used. And so each year as part of the audit process, we get an engineer's letter, their opinion of how much airspace has been used in that year, and then we have to make sure that that's reflected on our books, both in the expenses and in the liabilities. Then down the road, when we actually incur the cost to close it, we'll reduce the liability and take it off the books. So, and it's important that you understand that process because that's what's occurred here. Each year, we get this letter from the auditor, and from the engineer. And last year, the liability for this cell was at 49.5%. Now, due to the application process for the piggyback expansion, we had to get a modification on this hill and reduce the capacity for the C&D landfill. We had to reduce how much airspace we were going to have. And so in doing that, by reducing the capacity, we increased the percent full. So we had to recognize a larger amount to get the liability where it needed to be for 100% full. And that's essentially what's happened. Now, if you look at the pink part on this map, that's the part of the C&D, the piggyback expansion. That's the part of the C&D hill that's going to be incorporated into the piggyback expansion. Okay? That portion, once we construct the piggyback expansion, that portion of it will be essentially closed with the construction part of it. So it won't be closure anymore. It's just going to go into the piggyback. So basically what I'm saying is the closure portion that we're going to have is the green part around. The pink part's going to go into the piggyback. So right now we're recognizing it because until we actually construct the piggyback, we have to recognize all the closure for that C&D cell. But once we go into the piggyback, that will change because it will no longer be closure for the C&D. It'll be construction. And David can tell you, every year at audit time or any time we get into construction, we have this discussion. Is it closure or is it construction? You know, it's just semantics. So, that money that's being recognized this year as closure will become part of the construction money, and it won't be required as part of closure.
Does this affect the overall schedule of the closing and from a capacity standpoint? I mean, if
What it did do was let's say if we hadn't built the piggyback, we'd have had a lot more airspace for C&D. But once we got permitted for the piggyback, we had to reduce the height of the hill, which give us less capacity, and that's where this increased liability came in at. So, but as far as the total area, we're still fine for about 2035, 2040.
What we do with to record this liability is in the very beginning when we establish how many cubic yards we have for a specific permitted area and how much it's going to cost, estimated to cost to close, you divide the number of cubic yards into the cost, and that becomes your amount that you recognize on your books for the liability each time you use a portion of it. So every year, this year when the estimate came in from the engineer, we were at 67% full. Well, last year we were at 49.5%. Typically you see 4.5%, 5% usage. But because of the capacity being lowered, it jumped us up to a lot fuller. And that's basically what has occurred here.
What are we gonna do to collect the money, the difference in money?
we're not gonna have to collect that money because when we are collecting money already for, excuse me, for the construction. And because we're not gonna have to close that, because it's part of the construction, we have the money in construction to pay for that part of it.
Okay, so you already have that.
Yes,
It just has to do with the capacity.
it's a GASB requirement,
Okay.
basically is what, you know,
Is the costs are recognized on a percentage of capacity filled and based on current circumstances. So once the piggyback comes into play, the circumstances will change. And new estimates will be developed by the engineer. And then we'll
Yeah.
use new percentages of completion based on the new permitted sites.
and we've had this before over the years, in the last 20 years. Every time we build a new cell or make a change to how we're gonna go, we face this. Sometimes it goes one way, sometimes it goes another.
The next year, it will be more simple when we come to audit time. And there's been so much discussion about closure and post-closure. We wanted to take this opportunity to talk about it just as much as we need to. And I would rather it had come up next year rather than this year, but there's nothing funny about it. It's just the way we have, GASB, we have to do it, and it's just time to do it. There's no additional money needed. The length of the life of the landfill is not shortened up because it is just, money is in different places. But that's kind of where we are.
Okay? Thank you.
Let's move on to page 8. You'll see the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in net position. Here you'll see that total operating revenues for the year were $17,970,000. This was a 0.5% increase from last year. The largest increase was in tipping fee revenue, which increased approximately $150,000. And that increase was due to a 2% increase in tonnage that was received at the landfill during the year. You'll see total operating expenses were $22,705,000, and this is a large 26% increase, and that increase is primarily comprised of the increase in closure and post-closure care costs, which relates directly to the increase in the liability. I'd just like to point out those are non-cash expenses. You know, there was no cash expended for those. It was a liability recognition. The authority's other expense classifications were all comparable to previous years. Overall, the authority's operations for the year resulted in a decrease in its net position of approximately $4 million. And once again, that's the change in the estimates for the closure and the post-closure. The notes to the financial statements begin on page 11. I'd like to point out just a couple of notes to you. Note number 1 begins on page 11. This note is a summary of all the authority's significant accounting policies. This note provides information on how various transactions are accounted for in the financial statements. If you turn to page 15, you'll see note 3. This is the note that discloses the purposes for which cash and investments have been designated by the board. This is the $34 million amount that I referenced earlier. You'll see that there's amounts for closure, post-closure, equipment replacement, construction, MRF contingency, OPEB obligation, and waste diversion.
David, that construction is both landfill construction and our construction and development account, our regular capital infrastructure type. It's a combination of the two.
That's correct. Note 5 on the bottom of page 15 provides information about the authority's capital assets. It shows what the composition is and changes during the year in those assets. If you go to page 16, you'll see note 7. This is the disclosures about closure and post-closure care. On the bottom of page 16, you'll see a table that shows the capacity that has been utilized. I think Donna had referenced the construction and demolition at 67.5% versus 49.5% in the previous year. On the top of page 17, you'll see a table that shows a breakout of closure and post-closure liabilities by the different permitted landfill sites. And the table in the middle of that page shows the estimated remaining costs that will be recognized over future years as capacity is utilized. If you turn to page 18, I'd like to point out just one more note to you. It's the note on post-employment health care plan. This provides information about the plan as well as the actuarial methods and assumptions that were used to do the calculations and recognize that obligation. The last item I'd like to review with you today is our report on compliance and on internal controls that we issued in accordance with government auditing standards. That report's actually on the last page of the presentation. It's page 40. This report states that our audit disclosed no instances of non-compliance and no material weaknesses in the authority's internal control structure. I'm also pleased to report that our audit did not disclose any other findings that would warrant the issuance of a management letter this year. That's a brief overview of the financial statements. I would just like to conclude by saying it was a pleasure working with the authority staff in completing our engagement. They were very helpful and did a great job on their end. And I'd be happy to address any questions that you may have about the statements or our audit.
Meany?
Since I'm new, I guess I have a lot of questions about that.
Okay.
And, thank you. You didn't even have to raise that, you just slid it over here. I'm assuming, of course, I've looked at the county council budgets and audits and that kind of thing. Being from private industry, I see things a bit differently than public entities see audits and reasons for audits.
Yes, ma'am.
And through reading through this, and you'll just have to forgive me, but when in private industry, I need to know what my effectiveness is, and I need to know where I need to put money, and I need to know how I need to do other things to make money. And of course, your procedure, to me, it says that, and you said, and I feel sure that the people here in the finance are doing their job, and I feel sure they were very nice in showing you whatever you needed to know. I wouldn't question that. I guess the things that bother me in internal control over financial reporting, that you say it's not for the purpose of expressing an opinion on the effectiveness of what we do. And to me, if I don't know the effectiveness of what I do in a business, I'm not real sure why I need an audit.
The language in the reports is standard language required by the AICPA.
Okay.
All accounting firms will issue the same report in this format. What it's trying to say is that we've reviewed the controls and we've obtained an understanding of the controls, and we've sampled and tested it on a random type basis to determine that they've been placed in service and that they're operating effectively.
Okay.
What it refers to here is that we've not done enough work to express an opinion on internal controls, which is to give assurance on it. I think where you find that nowadays is in the SOX arena, the publicly traded companies that actually go in and express opinions on internal controls. This report is saying that we've not done that. That's the only environment that's currently being done is in publicly traded companies.
Okay, so you don't do that in the public companies?
That's correct. Even, I mean, I do a lot of for-profit company audits. We issue the same reports. The same procedures are done.
Okay. What would be the difference in asking you to give us that? What would be the difference in the money, and what would be the difference in the time?
Number one, I don't specialize in that. I would, would want to refer you to more of a, I would say, a national type firm that, does that work on a recurring basis. But it's a lot more. It would probably be the same amount of money to do that audit as it is to do the financial statement audit, would be my best guess.
Okay, so it wouldn't cost any more for us to know if we were as effective as we could be?
No, I think it
Or-
would cost double of what you're currently
Oh, you
paying.
think it would cost
Yes, ma'am.
double of what we're currently paying? Okay.
Basically, you'd go in and run every check through every account, basically, to see what was being done? How would they do that?
There would be a lot more, that's exactly correct. There'd be more substantive testing of transactions. In other words, they would have to have a sample size large enough to be able to give assurance on controls.
And you test that now, but you only test a small sample.
That's correct.
Right.
We update our understanding of the control annually, and we do spot checks to ensure that they're placed in operation. We just don't do the level of testing that would allow us to express an opinion on internal controls.
Yeah, but your sample is large enough to show that if there were deficiencies in the process, though, right?
That's correct. I mean,
Okay.
our review has shown that nothing has come to our attention in conjunction with our review that would indicate that there are problems with the internal control structure.
Okay. What % of a sample did you do?
On the whole audit, or on just on controls, or
The different facets that you did, what % did you check?
of revenues, expenses?
Yeah.
I would say across the board of all assets, we've probably looked at close to 95% of all the assets. We've confirmed balances. Of investments and bank balances. We've reviewed bank reconciliations. We've sent confirmations on the receivables. We've tied out the balances with the county. We've looked at the inventory counts. We've recalculated prepaid expenses. We've done search for unrecorded payables. We've looked at the actuaries' calculations for the OPEB obligation, as well as the engineers' estimates in conjunction with the closure and the post-closure. I mean, that's just on the balance sheet side, and we'll do additional testing on the revenue side and the expense side.
Okay. Well, I would have thought with 95%, you would have been able to give an opinion.
Well, we've given an opinion on the financial statements.
Okay.
I think it's two different issues. One's the financial statements, amounts, and disclosures is what we're giving an opinion on, as opposed to controls. It's two different things. So the controls are part of the audit of the financial statements, but to do the opinion on controls would be a different engagement.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, well, if I read it correctly, is that you're saying that we're using effective financial methods to handle our accounts and everything, but I think you're looking at the effectiveness of the organization in terms of whether we can make more money based on what we do.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be a
And I think
third
that's
type.
two different things.
That would be a third type of audit. That would be a performance type audit of, are you being effective? Are you performing as best as you can? Is there operational efficiencies that can be gained? That's a third type of audit engagement.
Okay.
Ms. Grace, that's a R.W. Beck type study they did here about 2003 and 4.
Okay.
That's what they did.
They did a performance study back in 2003 and 4, R.W. Beck.
And
Well,
we have the same type audit done at our company, and then in addition to that, what we do is we have identified on an ongoing basis several different, because we're a large cash business, several different departments where they'll come in and look at internal controls. And they don't do that across the board, company-wide, but they'll pick one department and say, okay, how's the money handled, the flow, and are there ways to challenge to make sure that we don't have money going out somewhere or mishandled, that kind of thing.
Right.
So we do that, and it's just, it moves around because we pick and choose. But this is the same type audit that we have done on an annual basis for us.
okay. I guess looking at from a different private perspective and owning my own, I wasn't worried about how that was controlled. I knew how it was. And frankly, I'm not worried about how this is controlled. I think they know what they're doing and doing it correctly and how they're doing it. I guess what usually interests me is what I can do to either solve a problem or help someone else be more efficient. That would be what I would consider my job as a board member. And it's hard for me to look at this and balance all those things together.
Well, we certainly want, including us, want to make sure everything is done. And, you know, when you go through this, the closure, post-closure, new construction, is a big part of this document and what we do. And that's the reason we actually called in a second engineering firm to take a look at it, to give all of us a comfort level that what we're doing is the best we can do to encourage, to tell the people outside that, hey, everything's fine. But, maybe that's something we can talk about, you know, in the next year's budget process, some certain things that we could do and setting some goals.
To me, the Solid Waste Authority is a county entity in a way, but yet with what we're doing here is so much more important to make sure we are doing it correctly and we have the money on hand to handle what we're doing because of the liabilities we have. That I want to make sure we have enough money on hand to do everything we need to do.
And not only that, is we had open house last week. 40-something people came out, and on the tours, they were amazed that there's no tax dollars goes here. And it's not like a regular governmental agency. If you mess up and you have a problem, you can go back to the well. The well here is that scale house and the tipping fees, and you got to, that's the cash register. So, and you're right, you've got to maintain that money, and when you need it, it's got to be there.
Right, it needs to be there. And to me, what you're basically telling us is we don't need to raise tipping fees, or we don't need to do anything that right now, where that cash flow and that liability in the future, that we're okay.
That's not exactly part of the audit.
That's what the engineers are telling us.
That's what the engineers are
Engineers
telling
are saying,
us.
but that's not what
Okay.
he's saying.
I want someone to tell me that.
Well, I just want to make it clear that as the external auditor, we can't perform management functions and make those type of assertions.
Okay, so the type of assertion that you gave us,
Is
that we need more money on the closure, post-closure, is coming from those.
I'm just saying that
That side.
the liabilities changed and increased dramatically because of the engineer's changes in estimate.
Well, I agree with you, because to me, the nature of the Solid Waste Authority business changes. It changes greatly because of what we take in, how it's put in, what different rules and regulations we have to be made to follow from year to year.
Exactly, and it can change.
It changes drastically, and to be able to be on top of that and to make sure we have what we need to do is the kind of effectiveness that I feel I need to be sure of.
Well, the authority has definitely, exercised their fiduciary responsibility in accumulating those funds, which I pointed out the note to you, in note 3, which, they've accumulated the authority has accumulated $34 million since 1992, I believe, to fund all different types of liabilities, being future construction or closure and post-closure type items as well.
But Pam, you're correct in that the engineers reviewing that every year is important, because if we wait 5 years and the numbers we think were right, then after 5 years, they may have changed so significantly we're behind the 8 ball.
Right.
So I think it's important that the
It would
review
be
happens
hard
on
to
an
come
annual
up with
basis.
that kind of money
Right.
in that limited period of time to do what we need to do.
I think next year's audit hopefully will prove what some people are saying, that if flow control goes away, we won't be hurt. But where he says we've increased tipping fees by, 2%?
2%.
Next year's audit may show that they have fallen
Right,
some.
yeah.
And then that will be a tipping fee discussion or reduction in program discussion, but hopefully, worst case scenario won't happen. But we're gonna watch it very closely.
Okay.
Any other questions?
The one thing, do we have any programs that are not funded, whether it be insurance or vacation pay or whatever, everything that we have now, is it funded? Is it on, that was one
We should
thing-
be in good shape. The retirement situation
The
from.
OPEB,
Right.
we did not start out, in the beginning when OPEB was put into practice, we didn't start out funding it because we didn't have to, but we went back and said, you know, we're going to fund this, we're gonna catch it up, and we're gonna have the money. Now, we do not have the money in an irrevocable trust. We have it in a designated account that the board set up. So we have another 2 years of catching up the money. We're funding it each year as we go along, and we're catching up the first 2 years right now.
How long do you think it'll be before you catch that up? And I
In-
guess the reason I'm asking, being in one of the county meetings, there was like $15
Yeah.
million in arrears.
Yeah,
and
they're-
They've got to come up with some way to pay
Yeah.
what I consider to be a policy that was unsustainable whenever that was made, way back when.
We have 2 more years, we're putting $175,000 a year into the account as a catch-up.
Yeah.
And so we've got 2 more years to do that, and we're funding as we go along. So in 2 years, we will be fully funded in our OPEB account.
Okay. Is there anything else that we're not fully funded in?
Well, the liability, the closure and post-closures are not completely funded. And what we do as a course of part of the audit is, after the audit's over and all of the year-end entries are put in, we'll take a look at that funding and see if we have some money in closure, post-closure, that maybe we need to shift to one of the other designated accounts.
And then the
in there.
surplus money that.
Yeah, and we'll
quarterly.
come in to you and present it to the board. And then, like Danny said, quarterly, when we have any kind of money, you know, where revenues are over expenses, we come to you quarterly and we transfer money. So that goes into there to fund that too, to
Okay.
keep those caught up.
The other account that I noticed that I guess was odd to me, I mean, from private industry, is that, and that was what I want to know, is it was already funded. Do you have the money, and are you putting the money in there every time? Is if employees do not take their vacation, when they leave, they can be paid for that? And the amount that was in here was pretty.
The compensated
substantial amount.
absences
Yeah.
that are in there. We do not have funds set aside for those compensated absences.
But we cover it.
But
through
we
the
cover it through
operation.
normal operations. We do pay them when they leave. Now, I mean, you'd have to have a mass exodus and everybody leave at one time to have to put out that money at
Don't
one
have to
time.
put out that much
Yeah,
money that you have.
yeah.
That's what
I mean,
OPEB did.
Yeah,
They said you've got to have.
You gotta have the
every bit
money
of
in
the
case-
money in
yeah.
the case, if everybody left or died today, you'd have to have it covered. But the first couple of years, even downtown, we were hoping for a silver bullet, or everyone was in this Gatsby
Right.
crosshairs,
Right.
and everyone was figuring maybe the Association of Counties or the Municipal Association would come together and develop a bank that you could, they would front it and you would pay into it. But the bullet never did get put in the
showed
gun.
Right.
And they haven't done anything, but we're doing everything we can do to catch up. And in the end of 2 years, we'll just be making that payment
You'll be
each
making
year.
that
Yeah.
payment, so it's funded. Okay,
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
that's what concerns me, because if you promise someone something, you ought to deliver on
And-
it. You don't need to wait 20 years and say, we can't do this, or we're not gonna give you that, because the employees are working toward that and have that. And to me, if it's unfunded or we're not putting it there, because the county's never gonna close. Solid Waste Authority eventually will close. And if you have 50 people or 30 people or 20 people or 100 people leave at that time, where is the money gonna come to do that at that time? I want to make sure we have the money.
that money is in a designated account, and there again, those designated accounts require board action to take any money out of that account.
Okay.
So,
And we do a lot of programs to keep that down. We let them buy
Yeah.
that time,
Yeah.
Christmas, at certain times to where we can whittle that thing down to keep it as low as well, because we know it's a liability.
Yeah.
Well, it
Yeah.
is a liability, and I think most private industry, if you don't take it, you lose it. You don't accrue future liabilities that.
We have
might be
caps on it. I mean,
Okay.
they can only,
So much.
yeah,
Okay.
so,
Well, it's a discussion probably for a different committee, but I'm of the opinion that vacations ought to be taken. Everybody deserves a vacation, and even if they say they don't want to take them, they need to take them.
I think so, too. I think they
We
work
all,
better.
absolutely, it make for more, not pointing any fingers, but everybody needs a vacation, so.
I don't know why I'm sweating.
Any other questions for Mr. DeCleva or for staff?
The more questions we have, the better off
Absolutely.
Well,
everybody's
if you'll
gonna
give me
be.
just a second.
Sure.
You've answered a lot of them, but I made quite a few notes in here. And like I said, I'm sure a lot of the wording is just, I used to work for state government, so I do understand. I used to work for Douglas Munns, who was over all of the social services in North Carolina. And I understand the wording. It's not a wording I particularly care for. I generally like to just, it is this and it isn't that, and it's a yes or a no, but that doesn't seem to be the way it is. And I guess probably most of my questions really don't have anything to do with your audit, because they have more to do with the meat of operation than they do with you looking to see what they've done. And like I said, I don't have any doubt whatsoever that they're doing what they need to be doing. I think they're doing what they need to be doing. The fact that you've said that's okay, right, then that's fine. So we'll discuss my other questions probably at a different time.
Well, let me ask a question. On page 2 of your letter, Mr. DeCleva, in the next to the last paragraph, you said, had we performed additional procedures, other matters might have come to our attention that would have been reported to you. Can you just give us some kind of idea of what those might be? You know, the red flags that are out there, things that may have been worrisome if.
I think basically what that's just trying to convey is that if we would have increased the amount that we would have looked at, it just increases the possibility that we would have come across something that may not be in compliance or done in accordance with the established policies and procedures.
Do you change the things that you look at from year to year?
We rotate around, but there's a core of items that, we do every year, and then, on an annual type basis, we might look at this area a little more closely, and then the next year on a cyclical basis, kind of rotate and re-update our understanding of controls and make sure, nothing's changed. I mean, one year you can be told things are done a certain way, and 2 years later, it might be change of personnel. So on a rotational type basis, all of those things are reviewed.
You read about occasionally companies, organizations, that the same person is depositing money and writing checks, and they're checking to make sure we have those internal controls in place, that there's less of an opportunity for things to happen that will damage our operational efficiency,
Right.
so.
In other words, if Danny's making all of those, he should be going on vacation. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, if not, we have a recommendation from staff to recommend from this committee to the full board the adoption of the fiscal year 2013 audit as prepared by Smith, Sapp, Bookout, Crumpler, and Callahan, PAs.
I move that we accept the
I
staff.
have a motion to accept the recommendation from staff. Second, any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. We will do that at the board meeting Tuesday night.
And another thing, if this committee or any of the other board members wants to sit down one-on-one with Donna and Jan or with all of us to talk about certain points, all you gotta do is let us know, come by, drop in. We'll go through those things, and we want everybody to feel very comfortable in what we're doing. And certainly we want to feel the same way.
that's right. And David can come back out if we need him to.
Sure.
To do that, so.
Good. Anything else?
I have
Donna?
2 things.
Okay.
One is that now, once this audit is complete and accepted by the board, we will be going out with an RFP for auditing services for a new contract. We're in the process of, we've got it semi-put together already and, for next year's audit. So,
That's a one-year agreement?
actually, it's normally a 3-year agreement with some, 1-year renewal type things in it. Ms. Sapp's done our audit for quite a long time now, but we've gone in and reviewed, and I'm imagine you will be bidding on it this time too.
Yes.
There's not a lot of firms locally that do governmental audits.
Right.
Now, there's some firms out of Columbia, and then there's some other, of course, all your national firms and all. So, and we feel fortunate that we've been able to use somebody locally because we've got hands-on, access to them.
I agree. I think it's easier to do, and I'd always, if it's possible, rather do local business.
And there's
keep
always
the
a
money
push
here
on
and
that.
the jobs
That's right.
where we are.
So,
We
so-
appreciate the hard work from the accounting firm, and also thank you for the staff in providing the assistance. That's always important to me, that accountants get the necessary cooperation that they need in order to do their job. So thank you, staff, for doing your job.
The second thing I have is, as part of the budget process this year, we had our annual bonuses budgeted in there that you approved as part of it. And we're right at that time of the year where we're ready to issue those bonus checks. And we kind of wanted to bring it up to you all and make sure everything was a go there. We're trying to, I'm sort of not saying when we're going to issue them because we're trying to do it as a surprise.
Sure. Do we know what the county's doing this year? Are theirs back in?
I do
I
not
think we
know.
had tried to follow suit with what the county had done,
Their budget retreat's the 7th and 8th of November. And
so we may not know
you may
until.
not know that.
They'll be talking about next year.
Okay.
This one was this year, but in this year.
And I meant to call and I did not
And I
find
really
out.
don't remember what went on with them about theirs in the budget process last year. But these have already been approved by
Right.
the board.
Sure.
We just want to let you know that we're going to go ahead and proceed with it.
And I hope the county will too. I
And,
think,
Yeah, I'm
and,
sure
in order
they're gonna
from
do
you know,
a
if
consistency
everybody's in
standpoint.
agreement, then we'll use the same criteria we did last year
Right,
and go with it for that.
good. Very good.
Okay.
Anything else for the committee or the auditor? And Mr. Clever, you're welcome to stay if you'd like to. While we had this committee in session, I just wanted to see if there was any update on the investment policies but because of the discussions we've had in the past on.
Danny and I talked about that yesterday. I have talked to Roddy, and we are putting together a 5-year plan on the funds that we're going to need for major projects. He has met with an investor. The county's going with a different type of investment, as he said when he was here, and he's met with them. But the plan was, once he met with them and we got those figures together, that he would bring him out here and let us meet with them so that we would have a better feel for how the investments were going to run. That's where we are right now. I've got to get him, so the next time the fellow's in town, he schedules us and he comes out, or we can go down there and meet with him so that we feel a little bit better about how that's
And
happening.
those points, we were putting together yesterday, certain points from the minutes on things that we had promised or we're gonna look at. And that's one of the,
Yes.
we should have more information at the board meeting Tuesday about when the guru's gonna be
Yeah.
back in
Right.
town and when we're gonna be able to sit down and meet with him.
Sure.
I did notice in here that it said the monies up to a certain point was covered by the FDIC and then other monies for different things. All of those monies are covered. You cannot lose any of them, can you, in anything that's been done in here?
That's correct. The funds in excess of the FDIC insurance is collateralized by federal securities at the
Okay.
banks. So they're all 100%.
That's required, isn't it?
Yes, for governmental entities, correct.
Okay.
And I think several of the board members had expressed concern about the opportunities to get better returns on the money, but obviously that is a requirement, and you would always want to make sure that we were
Yes.
protected in that regard, so. But I'm glad that that's moving forward, and that'll be good for the board to hear from. Any other business for the committee? From staff or anybody? Ms.
Well,
Creech?
one thing, as I was looking in here, it was saying, how much less we were making than we have been. And I guess with the anticipation of what's going to happen in Columbia and here and this, that, and the other, I'm interested in knowing if we have a plan B and what we may decide to do to cut out or to raise something to keep the same level of programs and what we're doing here under those circumstances, if we might not need to take some time, not necessarily now maybe, but sometime to work some of those things out and look at hiring or not hiring and looking in there, because the employees we have, in my opinion, do a good job. They need a bonus, they need their raises, they need this, that, and the other.
Take a vacation.
And since we are, so he can go on vacation, but since we may have all of these problems, I always like to have a plan B and C and know what I'm going to do and to make sure I can handle my obligations
Sure.
to them.
Well, you know, we've started that process with the prioritization, and the cut sheet and the things that if we have to make changes, we can through that budget process. But, you're correct in that that's something that we're gonna need to stay on top of. And, Dan?
If you'll remember in this big room, when we were having our all-day budget workshop, we talked about that. And one of the House members was here, and he didn't really chastise us, but he said we were scaring people, talking about the cut sheet. But I think you've got to plan for the worst-case scenarios, and I think we're doing that. We just bid and this too was gonna come up Tuesday night, but we can go ahead and talk about it. We bid a bulldozer. It came in above the budget. We bid it again to see if in fact we could get other people into it. It seemingly got higher, so we've just put that on hold till we see what's gonna happen with C&D. We've got some vacancies, and we're gonna hold those. One of them, I've allowed the department head to hire a temporary employee 3 days a week to see how that procedure goes. So we're looking ahead, and we're doing everything that we can possibly do on expenses. We talk to staff every week about what we got to do, and I feel sure we're going to lose C&D, and how much that's going to be. And we'll have some charts we can give you Tuesday night that really shows where we've been since 2007, and if this happens, where that puts us on that chart. And it basically will drop you down to probably below the level in 2007 when flow control was put in place. Nine, yeah.
Okay. Looking at that, to me, I'd rather not fill positions than to have to let people go under those conditions with people here.
And that's our position. Even one of the educational slots is open, and we talked about, if someone has got a job, they step out of that job to take this job, and then 3 months down the road, we said, well, sorry, you can do it, but it ain't the right thing to do.
No.
So we're just, it's on our mind.
Okay.
I think I wake up 2 o'clock in the morning thinking about it, and I think the rest of the staff does too. It's on our mind all the time, and so we're thinking in that direction.
Well, Mr. Knight has said a number of times, we have to finish in the black. You know, the budget has to balance, and one way or another, you know, you're gonna either increase revenues or reduce expenses somehow to make that work. And I do think we have some options there. Hopefully, it won't be as drastic in the worst-case scenario, but it is important that we stay prepared and be ready to do whatever's necessary to make that budget work.
I think so too.
I told council one year, it was, budget's like a big old seesaw. All of us that's been on one before, and you just got to balance that thing out.
That's right.
Get on it with a big large person and you in trouble.
Any other items for discussion? If not, Mr. DeCleva, thank you for your hard work and appreciate you attending today. Staff, thank you for all you've done and continued hard work. And committee members, thank you. And if there's nothing else, we'll adjourn and see everybody on Tuesday night. Thank you.
Thank you.